Hello, my name is Jonathan Curtis and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be discussing the use of accents and accent studies as a means to develop technique. Now, technique is predominantly a matter of understanding. We need to understand the core elements of the grip, the motions and the mechanics, but more importantly, we need to understand how these things synergize at the point of application. In other words, this means that by actually applying our technique, responding to the requirements of a piece of music, we learn to understand what is actually required of our technique in order to perform that piece of music well. So rather than practicing endless exercises without any context and trying to impose some technique onto that, we are always drawing on predisposition and bias. My hands should be in this position. My strokes should be performed this way. This can be quite a dead end because if we don't have the full understanding of what's required, we might often be forcing ourselves down the wrong path. So instead, by starting with the piece of music and saying, what do my hands need to do in order to produce this, we can come at this from a much more open perspective, increase our understanding of what's required, and develop much more progressively from there. So using accents and accent studies can be a good middle ground between non-contextualized exercises and simply working on a piece of music. Now, I'm a big believer that we should all be working on pieces of music all the time. I believe it is the best way to improve our technique, improve our musicality, and actually achieve what we're trying to achieve on the instrument. That said, there is certainly some value in dedicated technical practice, and for me, I find accent studies and their interpretation to be a great and productive means of doing this. So I've had a lot of success with this for my own playing. I have a lot of success for this with my students, so I'm going to share that with you now. Accent studies are essentially sticking patterns that comprise a certain rhythm or set of rhythms with accents and non-accents. Accents, of course, represent the louder strokes that are the emphasized points of the rhythm, and what I will call taps represent the sort of textural subdivision between those accents. So for simple purposes, we're going to deal with only two stroke types today: the accents, which are very loud and come from a vertical position, and the taps, which are very quiet and come from a horizontal position. And this approach is the simplest, but it's actually the most important as well. This is a game of contrast. When we are playing an accent study, we need to be focusing first and foremost on contrast. My accents need to be clearly defined, and my taps need to be contrasted against that so that the accents stand out. So let's put this all together and see what it is that I'm really talking about here. I'm going to begin with a very simple accent pattern that is based on triplets, groups of three: 1-ander, 2-ander, 3-ander, 4-ander, and I'm simply going to accent the beat: 1-ander, 2-ander. So hopefully you can hear there a strong contrast between the accented stroke on the beat and the two taps that follow it. Now, even though this is very simple, it is really, really important that we get this right, because what is to follow is not going to work unless we can build on this as a foundation. So I talked about understanding the core elements of the grip. I've talked about this in many videos before. I've written about this at great length and talked about it with students and on podcasts and on videos. But very simply, the grip, whatever grip you choose to play, whatever grip, whatever position, traditional, French, German, American, whatever it may be, whatever position you choose to play, it's always going to be comprised of three main elements: the fulcrum, the fingers, and the wrist. The fulcrum's job, in whichever way it manifests, whichever fingers you use, whichever position or rotation you are in, the fulcrum's job is to provide the point of rotation for the stick. Without that fulcrum, the stick can't rotate, which means the fingers can't engage, which means we are not in control of the strokes. So for me, and the way I play and the way I generally teach, the fulcrum is between the thumb on one side and the first crease of the index finger opposite. Now, some people like to use their middle finger. Some people like to use their middle finger exclusively. Some people like to use a mixture of both of their front fingers. That's fine. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you actually have a fulcrum and you understand what it is there for. So in this position, the thumb simply has one job. It is to keep the stick in that position. As soon as that thumb starts to waver, the stick rolls up the finger and we start to wrap round it and we lose the range of motion. We don't want that to happen. So when I'm in my starting position here, My fulcrum at the front of the hand is nice and strong, and that allows me to open my hand, and you see my fingers have straightened. These fingers can now close, pulling the stick back into my hand, and this is me controlling the stroke. This is what I talk about when I say engage the fingers. So a very simple stroke is formed here between the fulcrum allowing the stick to pivot and rotate, and my fingers opening and closing to produce each stroke, and of course a little bit of wrist movement to inject some energy and movement into that system. It's not rocket science, but it's actually strangely difficult to do if you are unfamiliar or not used to this. So our first job here is to produce our accents with a nice big open stroke. I'm going to start hovering the stick over the position on the drum that I want to strike. So right in the middle of the drum, I'm hovering about an inch, a couple of centimeters above the drum head, and I'm going to use my wrist and simply open my hand. I'm pointing to the ceiling, my fingers are open, and my thumb is still where it was, keeping that stick in the fulcrum. From there, I'm going to snap the wrist downwards, close the fingers, and there's my accent. Now I've got two options. What I just played here is called a downstroke. This is where the fingers stay closed, and that stick stays in a downwards position. This is useful when the next stroke we want to play is a tap. You can see that second stroke is much quieter. It's because I closed the fingers, I didn't let the stick rebound, and it's in a low position, ready for a quiet stroke. Alternatively, if we want to play consecutive accents, I'm simply going to let that stick rebound, open my fingers, rotate my wrist upwards again, and I'm in position for another accent. But I'm doing that by closing the fingers as well as moving the wrist. So I've essentially got two options. I can stay up, ready for another accent, or I can stay down, ready for a tap. This is the fundamental framework between sticking. This is how we create our dynamics. This is how we create our accent patterns. So when I play my accented groups of three, we don't have any consecutive accents in this particular pattern. So I'm always playing an accent as a downstroke. And you can see for each accent there, I'm flicking the stick up, my fingers are opening, then I'm snapping it back down again, keeping the fingers closed, ready for the tap that comes next. And there is our very simple accent pattern, and this is our framework. Now, as I said, don't neglect this. Don't underestimate how important this is. Now, many people have good technique. They may be great drum kit players already, or maybe even able to play some really nice things on the snare drum, but nevertheless may struggle in producing consistent, clear, and contrasted accents. So if that describes you, swallow your pride and spend a little bit of time really clearing up, really focusing on the clarity and the contrast between these accents, because it's really important that we are able to express these dynamics. So, whatever accent pattern it is you're working on, I'll demonstrate it in a moment with a simple clave accent pattern. We want to make sure that the contrast is there, the fingers are opening and snapping closed and staying in a low position for these taps. So let's hear the same idea now, but expressed as a clave rhythm instead. Now, as we start to speed this up, any deficiencies in our technique, our articulation, our dynamic control, they are going to be magnified as we get faster. So as I start to increase the speed, I need to become even more mindful of the clarity and control of those contrasts. I want to be able to hear that clave clearly all the time. Now, a nice benchmark you can set for yourself here, if you're wondering, are my accents clear enough? Imagine that your friend or somebody walked into the room as you were practicing an accent pattern, and you said to them, "Can you sing the accent pattern I was just playing?" Now, if they are not able to discern the accent pattern, if the tune, if you like, the melody, the phrase of that accent pattern is not clear enough for them to hear it and sing it back to you, chances are your accents aren't quite contrasted enough. The accent patterns should be so clear that it stands out like a melody. And that's a really useful way to picture this or to think of this. The accent is like the melodic aspect of the musical phrase we're playing. So I'm going to return to my groups of three, our triplets here. And we're going to move on to our second interpretation. And very simply here, we are going to flam each accent. And the reason that I like to place the flams second is because it doubles down on the stick height idea. In order to produce a flam, we need two contrasting stick heights, a high stick and a low stick. We play both strokes at the same time, and we get our flam. Now, we all know that flams can be played in isolation. But as I said at the beginning, we need to understand how these flams actually get used in practice, for real, when we are playing musical phrases. So now, not only do we have to produce flams, but we have to produce them on the correct hand as part of a broader phrase. So I'm going to maintain my groups of three. I'm still in a triplet rhythm, one-ander, two-ander, but every right-hand accent now becomes a right-hand flam with the right-hand high, and every left-hand accent becomes a left-hand flam with the left-hand high. The sticking doesn't change. We're just going to think of the flam as a decoration for what's already there. Try not to get bogged down in thinking, but the left stroke hits first, so does that count as a left stroke? No. A right flam is a right-hand stroke. It just happens to be decorated by something else elsewhere. We don't need to get too over-analytical about the sticking because otherwise we risk confusing ourselves. So a right flam is just a decorated right stroke, and a left flam is just a decorated left stroke. Now, this is where this concept of allowing the correct technique to emerge starts to crystallize. I know that I can play flams, and I know that I can play a single stroke accent rhythm as triplets, but are my flams accurate? Are they articulated? Are they clear? Are they the correct sticking? Are they incorporating well into what I'm already doing? And if not, what do my hands need to do differently in order for them to do so? So I need to ensure I've got different stick heights between the two hands when I do the flam. I need to ensure I play a tap on the correct hand. I need to ensure the flam is articulated. I can hear two distinct sounds that are very close together. I need the whole system to work without disruption. So all the while I'm doing this, I'm paying attention to what my fingers are doing, thinking about these down strokes where I keep the stick in a downwards position, thinking about opening my fingers for the accents, thinking about maintaining the rhythm, thinking about maintaining contrast in the accents. If I start very, very slowly, I can be very mindful of every movement I make. And it's quite amazing what this approach can actually do for your technique and, more importantly, your understanding of that technique. Because by doing this, by doing it slowly, by doing it mindfully, with great attention to what is required, we learn a great deal about how the hands work, about how the grip works, about how the fingers work, and how they have to work in order to produce that. So our second interpretation, very, very simply, every accent becomes a flam. I will demonstrate it now with the same clave pattern as previously. Now, as we start to speed up again, we will start to find that the fingers have to engage in order to maintain that sort of speed, to maintain the articulation with the flams, and to allow the accents to occur. If you are a drummer who has never really worked with the fingers before, and you find that your wrist is doing everything, you will quickly find that the wrist becomes incapable of keeping up. And this is where you really have to focus on those fingers opening and closing, even on the lower tap strokes. It just happens from a smaller height. But again, a little bit of work opening and closing the fingers and working with the accents and taps can do wonders for understanding how those taps have to occur. But really, the fingers are going to have to engage. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to produce the speed, and we're certainly not going to be able to produce the accents or the flams. So let's move on to our third interpretation now. We're going to remove the flams back to standard accents, but every tap is now going to become a double stroke. They're going to stay on the same hand, so right, left, right would become right, left, left, right, right. The rhythm has doubled for the taps. They have gone from, let's say, 8th notes to 16th notes, or 16th notes to 32nd notes. So there's going to be a accent, double, double, accent, double, double. There'll be a slight pause after each accent. Again, I'm trying to stay in control of the contrast of those accents. I'm trying to keep the double strokes nice and low, but also clearly articulated. If you can see from the side, those fingers are opening and closing twice to produce that double. I'm not going to go into great detail as to how to produce double strokes now. I've done that in plenty of other videos. Suffice it to say, the whole purpose of this interpretation is to allow you to focus on the articulation of those double strokes, because as we start to speed up, once again, we're going to need those fingers to be engaging twice to produce the clarity. This isn't about trying to let the sticks rebound or trying to control a bounce. We're not interested in that. We're interested in trying to bring out the control of those fingers in order to control the double strokes. I'll do the same thing now with the clave rhythm, and you can hear how this can be applied to a multitude of different accent patterns. And there's our double stroke interpretation. And this is really valuable, as I say, for producing those double strokes and learning to understand how those fingers have to engage in order to produce clear and articulated double strokes. I will revisit these all and recap them at the end, but I'm going to move on now to the fourth and final interpretation for today. And this is quite an unusual one, but we're going to invert that previous one so the accents become double strokes instead. And where the previous interpretation of the double stroke taps was concerned, we were dealing with low double strokes and double stroke control at low dynamic levels. Here, we are concerned with actually strengthening the fulcrum. For many people who struggle with their technique, a weak fulcrum is often one of the main causes of that. And this interpretation is very, very productive and very, very efficient at strengthening that fulcrum, because we are trying to do two things at once. We're trying to retain an accent, retain that volume, retain that stick height, but we're also trying to produce a double at the same time. So I have to allow those fingers to open and close twice. Both strokes we want to be accented in this early stage, and we are trying to feel how the fulcrum has to stay strong in order to allow that stick to open and close twice. So we're going to go accent tap, tap, accent tap, tap, where there are two strokes within the accent. You can see I'm trying to bring out the sticks, I'm trying to open the fingers every time, and I'm whipping those fingers strongly twice to create the accented double stroke. Now, the idea behind this, as I say, alongside strengthening the fulcrum, is that if you can produce and isolate and control an individual diddle stroke, you can just simply combine them to create a double stroke roll. So it is not so much the act of repeating double strokes that is the difficult part for a double stroke roll. It is in the control of the individual double strokes themselves. So in this interpretation, whatever the accent pattern may be, we are actually having to isolate the double stroke and produce individual instances of them, which actually in some ways can be harder than simply repeating them. Many people kind of fall into this rote repetition of double strokes as it's a crutch, it's easy, it's familiar. By having to, as I say, articulate these double strokes individually, it can require a much greater degree of control, which in turn feeds back into our control of the double strokes generally. So if I do the same thing now with the clave rhythm, you will see how the accents once again become double strokes. The double strokes themselves start to act as the accents. We no longer need to focus too much on the volume at this point. It's more to do with the emphasis, which actually comes from the double strokes themselves. But hopefully you can hear there that those accents are strong. The double strokes are strong. I'm not doing these as taps. I'm not just letting them drop. I am producing two distinct strokes. So a nice way that you can practice this, I would say there are two ways you really want to practice this. The first is to take each interpretation individually and focus on the one that is most relevant to you. So if you are struggling with stick heights and accents, the first two, the straight accents and the flams, might be very valuable. If you are struggling with double strokes and especially a weaker fulcrum, the second two, the third and the fourth interpretations with the double stroke taps and especially the double stroke accents can be very valuable. So you can choose the interpretation that best matches what it is you are trying to work on. The second way you might like to work on this is whichever accent study and whichever accent pattern you are playing, run through all four of them and try to make all four interpretations essentially sound the same. It is the accents that are providing the musical content, so the accents always need to be clearly expressed. So if I demonstrate this with the clave rhythm, I will run through all four interpretations and hopefully that clave accent rhythm should be clear, audible on all four interpretations. And practicing in that way can really highlight any errors, any weaknesses in your grip and technique. And it's coming from the right way around, because we are not saying I'm trying to do it this way. We are asking, what do I need to do in order to perform it this way? Because we know those accents need to be clearly contrasted. We know the flams need to be clearly articulated and retain the correct sticking. We know the double strokes need to be audible and again articulated. And likewise, we know those double stroke accents need to be loud and clear. So we need to say, what do I need to do with my technique in order to meet those criteria? And it would be the same if you were practicing a study, an etude, or a solo itself. What do I need to do with my hands in order to produce that bar? I can see the accents, I can see the dynamics, I can see the sticking, I can see the rhythm. I have an idea of the musical phrase. So what do my hands need to do in order to produce that? Rather, we are not going to say, I want to do it this way, so that's the way I'm going to do it. That is trying to impose predisposition and our own biases on the music. That's the wrong way around. We might be wrong. We might be mistaken. We might have misconceptions or misunderstandings. So we need to come at it with an open mind. What do I need to do in order to produce that? So I hope this has been valuable to you. If you enjoyed this lesson, you'd like to explore about me, my publications, my compositions, or perhaps my teaching, come and visit me at jonathancurtis.co.uk. Good luck in your own playing and practicing. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.